Morgan Pehme, Editor-in-Chief of City and State, and this is Last Look. Today, our guest is Errol Louis, the host of Road to City Hall on New York One. Errol, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
You have been a television reporter, a radio host, and of course a print columnist, most notably for the Daily News. What is the difference between the three media for you as a journalist?
Well, that's a big question. In the end, it's all the same. In the end, it's storytelling. It's finding information and conveying it reliably and in an interesting manner. And then everything else is just about what works better on what particular platform. So with radio, I did a 3-hour show. I mean, and it was kind of open. I mean, every Friday we would just take phone calls and we would talk about whatever the listeners wanted to talk about. Compared to that, television is far more structured, and of course print has its own advantages and different sort of structural requirements. So it really just depends on, look, I'm a consumer of media, and I was that long before anything else. I grew up on the radio, I read the newspapers all the time, and I certainly watched a lot of television. So just like a consumer of the news, you sort of provide it the way people want to get it. Sometimes people want to hear it while they're driving, and they maybe want a little entertainment along the way. That's kind of what I think of as radio is providing. If they're reading, they want to sit down and maybe drill down into some numbers and get some depth and some background and some history in a way that's really not available on television, because on television you've got just less time and it's so visual that it's really all about the images. So, it just depends on what elements you're going to sort of bring to your storytelling and what format, framework, and amount of time that you're going to present. But, I mean, there's been more than one instance. This was very true when I was doing radio and at the newspaper, where the same interview would end up being the basis of a newspaper column, and it would have served as a live interview. You can take the same material and just repackage it or present it in different ways.
As a questioner, do you feel like it's a different art, though? It seems that it's harder to dodge some questions on television when when the audience can see the answer's body language and see that, wow, that looks like they're trying to avoid answering something that's unpleasant. Whereas when you call up someone as a print journalist, they can say, I'm not going there, and that almost never kind of gets across.
Well, that's right. That's exactly right. Television conveys so much information that in a lot of cases, like once in a while, people will write to me and say, hey, you really let that guy off the hook. You didn't really press them on the question. And sometimes I even respond and tell folks, you don't have to do that. You ask the question once. You ask the question twice. The person's sweating and twitching and ducking and dodging, and maybe I'll lift an eyebrow or something, and then everybody knows, and we can just save everybody some time and move on. You don't have to delve into what was or wasn't answered. People can see for themselves if somebody on television, including me, is being evasive or getting distracted or not really answering the question. So you have to know how to use the medium properly, and television really is an all-seeing eye. You can't get away with stuff, as you say, that you could get away with in print. In print, people can say, I'll tell you this on background, at which point you have to make a decision. Well, does this conversation go forward or does it not? On television, we've already told people and we've strapped them up. They're in the chair, the light's on, the mic's hot, and it's like, you're here for the next 8 minutes. You can answer or not answer, but I am going to ask you the right questions.
Of course, your show is called The Road to City Hall. How do you think that with the turnover of all the citywide positions and so many new faces in the city council, the coverage of city politics is going to change? Oh
boy, okay, now you're getting me to think about the huge burden of work that we're going to have in January, and we haven't finished with the current burden of work of getting through the elections. Well, there are going to be a lot of new names and faces, and in some cases there are going to be some reorganizations. I mean, folks forget this, but when a new mayor comes in, he or she can change the number and structure and reporting lines of the deputy mayors. They can eliminate deputy mayors. They can add deputy mayors. They can change the agency heads. They can change the agency reporting lines. Once in a blue moon, you get some agencies that are actually merged or sharing the same commissioner. There's all kinds of stuff that are going to go on. And it'll be important to report it accurately, of course, but also to sort of see how it dovetails with the philosophy of the next mayor, whoever that might be. They've, in some cases, made some pretty serious promises about who's going to be the chancellor and what different programs they're going to bring to bear. So I think you have to work backwards from the basics, education and public safety and the things that everybody has to deal with, transportation. But then beyond that, you have to sort of take the list of promises that each candidate made of what they were going to do. I mean, because I've asked, I don't know if you've asked the same question, but I've asked them, what are you going to do in your first 100 days? And we're going to play that clip back and make a list of what they said they were going to do. And day by day for the first 100 days, we'll make sure that they are honoring or at least explaining what they've done about those pledges.
Do you think with so many freshmen, so to speak, in office, that the power dynamic between the media and politicians might shift a little bit? I mean, when you've been hosting Inside City Hall, Road to City Hall for 3 years now, and you are very much baked into the cake in terms of the coverage of city politics. But here are so many newbies going to be coming in, and they're trying to establish their own place. And I feel like the media might feel in a stronger power position to kind of ask some tougher questions, to hold politicians a little bit more accountable.
Well, as you know, there are also a lot of newbies on the media side, right? I mean, there are floods of kids coming out of journalism school every year, and some of them are moving from one organization to another, and they're trying to get their feet wet and figure out City Hall as well. So we're all going to go through this together. I think it's always a struggle in New York City for someone who's a relatively junior political person. Either that's because they're new to the office or they're new to politics. It's very hard to get heard in a city where the mayor and the governor, and we've got 2 senators, and we've got the United Nations, and the president comes through here, and we've got an ex-president who lives in the same market here. And so it's very hard for them to get heard. That's going to be a challenge for them no matter what. And it leads to, I'd like to think, a more creative approach to how they handle their public duties. In other words, instead of sending out a press release every other day, wait until you've done something of significance and then hold a press conference and try to build relationships with members of the media so that we can start to understand where they fit into this very complicated puzzle. I mean, there's 51 council members, that's 51 careers, 51 aims, 51 instances in which they've made promises to, a few 100,000 residents of the city. I wouldn't pretend to know what all of them are hoping to do, and so little by little, we'll all figure it out together.
You talked about the number of new faces in the press corps. Do you think that there has been a breaking down of kind of institutional memory among the City Hall press corps? I mean, of course, there are still lions like David Seifman covering City Hall, but it seems like with the dwindling size of the newsrooms, of the dailies, that increasingly we see more and more turnover in the coverage of City Hall. And I was wondering if you feel like that has adversely affected coverage.
I don't think it has, and here's why. There are a lot of people who leave the institution where maybe they had hoped to spend their entire career. There are folks at the Daily News and at the New York Times, and they get a buyout, they get a tap on the shoulder, they get downsized, and they have to leave. The good news is that they don't leave altogether. In a lot of cases, they end up in a different newsroom. In a lot of cases, they end up teaching the next generation of reporters at the Columbia School of Journalism or at the CUNY J School. And so I see a lot of people who are maybe changing titles, moving to a different building, but they stay in the business. And frankly, even if and in some cases they end up going on to the other side, meaning they're working in communications or public relations, but even there, they're still part of the game. If they're working in some agency, helping that agency explain itself to the media, I'd say that they're still part of an important function that we collectively serve the public by doing, and those years that they've spent are not lost. So no, I don't think, frankly, not everybody agrees with me, but I would say, Morgan, that we are in a golden age of reporting, meaning we've never had more powerful tools. We've never had greater ability, at least, to reach worldwide. I mean, this was unthinkable in the 1980s when I got out of college. The notion that you could write something and somebody in Tokyo could be reading it within seconds, or that you could tweet it out to 10,000 people all at once, it was unthinkable. So we're in a golden age, I think, of reporting and investigative reporting in particular. There isn't a week, if you think about it, there isn't a week that goes by where there isn't some major investigative piece that comes out. You'll read it in the Washington Post or the New York Times or ProPublica or some other place. The challenge is to make sure that we are using all of that power effectively and getting people what it is they want to know. Because, as they say, you can always do another video of cats doing backflips, and that'll get 1 million hits. But are we telling people what they really need to know? That to me is the challenge.
There certainly has been a democratization of the media, right? And there's no longer just a few networks or a few dailies and those are the only outlets for your news.
Well, the audience, they're a big part of it now. The audience, through Twitter and some other platforms, they can bring us information that we might not otherwise have known. It's much more interactive. Like I said, it's really a golden age. It's an incredible opportunity. The only question is whether or not we're going to use it properly.
Other than City Time, there have been really no other major scandals that came to light during the Bloomberg administration. Do you think that's because Mayor Bloomberg led a very clean administration for the most part, or do you think that there was either reluctance or on the part of the media to delve deeper into?
Well, first of all, let me disagree with you a little bit. I mean, there was a slush fund scandal over on the other side of City Hall that could not have happened without some level of cooperation out of the agencies. That's number one. Number two, there were some major scandals in the Department of Buildings and in HPD. I don't know if there have been no scandals, but I'll accept the premise and say
we haven't seen commissioners hauled off in handcuffs.
This is true. It's been more like assistant commissioners and some agency heads. Okay, that's fine. To the extent that is true. It might in part be because we've had an aggressive Department of Investigation. I think they've done a fairly good job at rooting out corruption. I think also there's been, on the part of the media, I wouldn't say they've given a break, because look, I don't know a single reporter who, no matter how friendly they might be to this administration and its aims, who wouldn't pounce on a story if it was laid in front of them of outright corruption. I don't know that person, right? So maybe there's actually less of it. I don't know that the press is. Now, as far as the editorial boards, and I used to serve on an editorial board. Are they friendly to this mayor? Absolutely. The publishers of the papers, the Sulzberger family, Mort Zuckerman, Rupert Murdoch, they are personally friendly with Mike Bloomberg. I mean, they come out of the same social circle. So has that tilted some of the interpretation of the news to the mayor's advantage? Probably.
And I wasn't trying to intimate that reporters have let stories go, that they know about and unreported, but more like, I was rereading City for Sale recently, and there was a point where Wayne Barrett and Jack Newfield write about Marcia Kramer and the city editor of the Daily News, Arthur Brown, and they decide to probe the Best-Meyerson affair, and Newfield and Barrett write, the mindset of the dailies had become accepting of too many things. And I was wondering if that is an appropriate criticism for it now. It's not so much that they're not pursuing stories, but they're not pulling back the curtain when the curtain is difficult to find.
That's interesting. Look, let's take as a small example the issue of the mayor not disclosing his whereabouts, right? Flying off to Bermuda and not really explaining when and where or even why.
Which was known about for years prior to.
It was known about for years, but look, Michael Saul at the Wall Street Journal, they finally went down there and they got the ID numbers of the planes and they interviewed people down in Bermuda, and they pretty much nailed that story. And he's kind of gotten sharp replies and sidelong looks from the mayor ever since. A solid piece of reporting. It needed to be done. It got done. I think the difference between now and, say, the era that you're talking about when Newfield and Barrett were sort of at the peak of their power was that you don't see other media organizations jumping on the bandwagon. So, and this might be related to the size of newsrooms and some of what you were talking about before. There was a time when if there was a big or small scandal or point of controversy that the Village Voice or the New York Times or the Daily News brought out, it was kind of understood that until we got to the bottom of it, everybody else would sort of push that story or at least consider picking it up, so that at the next availability by the mayor, at the next daily press conference where he's talking about a lot of different things, somebody would ask it. He might tell the Village Voice, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. This happened with Koch quite a lot, actually. But then other people would ask and say, well, it has been reported that you've got this problem in the Parking Violations Bureau. What's the latest? And so I think there's a little bit less of that. So there's a little bit less PAC journalism, if you want to call it that, It might be because the PAC is a little smaller. I mean, that gets to the issue of resources. I tend to think, though, honestly, that it's also because we've got the power and the tools and the ability to do all kinds of different stories that you don't have to run with the PAC, even if it's an important story. You can say, well, you know what? Let Michael Saul figure out what's going on with the mayor's plane down in Bermuda. I've got another story and a different angle and an audience that I need to serve, and maybe it's best served by going in a different direction.
Today in your column, you wrote about charter schools and about the impact that this election might have on the charter school movement. It's an issue that we've covered closely. What is your take?
I'll start with a sort of a mea culpa. I did not realize until the news of this upcoming march, a bunch of the charter school organizers and teachers and parents are going to have a big march, probably at least 10,000. It might be 2 or 3 times that size by the time they're done, over the Brooklyn Bridge, and they want to make sure the next administration, whoever it is going to honor and support and enable the expansion of charter schools, or at least not attack them. I have to say, as I started looking at it, I was caught a little flat-footed, because even having moderated 13 mayoral debates and watched I don't know how many more and interviewed the candidates a number of times all year, I had not really sort of put together the level of sort of, to be blunt about it, hostility, the statements that are just hostile statements that have come from Bill de Blasio, where he says, we don't need any more charter schools. We need to ask them to pay rent, which for some of them is like a death knell, or at least a serious incursion into their ability to provide services. We need a moratorium on co-locations, which is almost the same thing as saying, basically, get out in the street. I had not realized that he had sort of put one stake in the ground after another that was going to really cause them problems. I think they just woke up to it, frankly. And so they've decided to organize this march. So the column I wrote was about the sort of coming clash. And as is often the case, I'm kind of hoping the clash can be avoided. So I offer a little suggestion about how they might want to maybe work around that, because I don't think it helps anybody for folks to be marching in the street and calling names and threatening each other's institutional positions and getting into what has become in some ways a personal back and forth with Eva Moskowitz, one of the big charter school operators, and Bill de Blasio. In the end, that doesn't serve anybody, and I say that as a parent. I'm hoping that we can make this a more informed and better discussion, and I hope my column helps push it in that direction.
I mean, do you think there could be a real substantial reversal of the city's approach to charter schools? I mean, of course, beyond the rhetoric or beyond what Bill de Blasio has kind of laid out for that it seems that it's so inherent in our system now, charter schools, that to go back the other direction would be quite an about-face.
Well, I asked myself that, and I asked some of the charter operators that, and I got quite an education and an earful. I asked some of them, it's like, look, isn't this really baked in? I mean, you've got, 70,000 kids in charter schools. There's 183 charter schools. Don't you guys have leases? Well, the answer is no, they don't have leases. They have basically a certificate from the chancellor saying you can stay here for the next year. It's basically a plan on how to utilize a building space. And if your name's in it, then the charter school can go. And if your name's not in it, the charter school doesn't get to go. And it's really just that simple. So they're feeling very exposed because they realize that they don't have, they have public support, which is what they're going to try to demonstrate by having this march. But in the end, they have no claim. I mean, like anything else in New York, you can run to court and see if you can vindicate your rights. But the reality is they could easily see a radical change from the life as they have known it, as far as their relationship to the Department of Education over the last 12 years. I mean, that's what mayoral control means. There's nobody else to appeal to.
I try to be really cautious about not prognosticating in my columns, because I'm invariably wrong. The only prediction I made this year was that Eliot Spitzer would win, and we'll see how that turned out.
Okay.
But you had written up until probably about 3 weeks out of the election that the black vote would ultimately break toward Bill Thompson, which it didn't. And then after the election, you wrote that you applauded the fact that it did not do so. Do you think that there is really a shift away from identity politics in the city? Is this a manifestation of that trend? Well,
first, let me say in my own defense that I don't do prognostication either. And I didn't predict that the black vote would break for Bill Thompson. What I said was that if history is any guide, it will break in his favor, and that it is illogical to assume that it won't. Because what I'd seen was some polling numbers that suggested that Bill Thompson, was going to get fewer black votes than Anthony Weiner, that he was going to get fewer black votes than Christine Quinn. In the end, it shifted to de Blasio, that he was going to get fewer black votes. And my only point was, that is not a logical assumption. That upends, 100 years of voting history. So let's not just assume that we're going to upend 100 years of voting history, which of course the voters went ahead and did. So why did they do that? I don't know. I didn't expect it. There's no historical precedent for it. One theory goes that black voters, like Asian voters, like all voters really, will not waste their vote. So that if they perceive that a candidate, even if it's somebody they really like and is part of their little in-group, their tribal group, I like to call them, if they perceive that that person can't win, they're not going to throw away their vote. And that arguably is what happened with a lot of John Liu's base in the Asian community. So I think there was probably some of that going on. People just sized it up and said, you know what, I don't think Thompson's going to do it. There's also a theory, which is a rational one, which is that a candidate like Bill de Blasio has a relationship to the black community that we've never seen before. And this is where the son, Dante with the afro, comes in. We knew he had a black wife, and very much to his credit, Bill de Blasio sent the same mailers featuring his multiracial family. He sent them to Staten Island, to the South Shore. Well, he didn't send any mailers, but he did the same messaging. I mean, he sent mailers when he ran for public advocate 4 years ago. He's never tried to hide his family. He's never tried to finesse it in any way, shape, or form. He said, look, this is my family. This is who they are. I noticed one thing, and I don't think he could have predicted it. I don't think his team did predict it, which is that there were a large number, anecdotally I'm talking now, of middle-aged black women who adore his son. And they would ask the reporters, is he going to bring that kid? We want to see Dante. We want to see the kid with the afro. So he has a different relationship. What do you do in a case of if you want to try to define how race and ethnicity are going to break in a race where you've got a multiracial family? We've never seen it before. So we have a new data point. Maybe it says more about the candidate, his family, and the politics of this moment than it does about New York voters. And that's something it'll take time to sort of sort out in the future. When the next candidate with a multiracial family comes along and voters cast their vote, then we'll have sort of a second data point, and then we can try and figure out where people are going. But, to your larger point, identity politics, the fact that Christine Quinn, apparently, according to the exit polls, did not get a majority of the LGBT vote, it tells you, once again, something else is going on here. Either people didn't want to throw away their vote, or they didn't like her on the issues, or they thought that what they heard from the other candidates was more than adequate, and so it wasn't about identification, it was more about, or maybe identity was trumped by something else. And, frankly, that would be, if I had to pick one factor, I would suggest that the notion that it's time to move on, that although a solid block, I think in the upper 40% range, mid 40% range of Democrats who voted in the primary like the job that Mike Bloomberg has done, 3/4 have said it is time for something new. And to the extent that you wanted to sort of turn the page, if that was the predominant sentiment driving primary voters, Bill de Blasio was clearest on that, and he was the most consistent on that. He was far more consistent on it than Christine Quinn, certainly. More consistent in some ways than Bill Thompson, and so, the takeaway by some of the other candidates, including Anthony Weiner, is that that's what won the race for him. And I think that's a reasonable assumption, at least, so far.
Errol Louis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that's it for this episode of Last Look. For more episodes, please join us on the web at cityandstateny.com.